Good afternoon, members of Parliament, support staff, radio listeners, TV viewers, those following via social media, and members of the media. Welcome to the continuation of this Committee of Finance meeting number 3 today, Thursday, February 23rd, 2023. I welcome the Minister of Finance, Ardwell Arian, and his support staff. We have established a quorum of 6 factions. Please stand for a moment of silence. Thank you. I have not received any notice of absence from members. Before I continue, I look to the floor to see if any members of Parliament have any notifications. MP Peterson, you have the floor.
No, sorry, Madam Chair. I was just going to say that MP Bryson gave a notice of absence in the chat.
Thank you, MP Peterson. We have as agenda point for this meeting the tax reform measures and government's vision for tax reform. MP S.A. Wescot-Williams requested this meeting. We go over to the agenda point. On May 23, 2022, Parliament received a letter from MP S.A. Wescot-Williams requesting that a meeting of the Committee of Finance of Parliament be convened with the above-mentioned agenda point. The presence of the Minister was also requested. This document is registered as Incoming IS-928-PY22-23, dated May 23, 2022, and can be found on the P drive. The meeting started on February 8, 2023, and was subsequently adjourned for the Minister of Finance to return to give answers to the questions posed by the members of this committee. Hence the reason for a return for today's meeting. I give the floor to the Minister of Finance to answer the questions. Thank you, Minister.
Yes, new technology. Good afternoon, members of Parliament. Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, Khafir. Good afternoon to the viewing public. I'll just go right into the answer of the questions. The questions posed by MP Sarah Wescot-Williams. Her question was in regards to the, as she mentioned, blossoming lottery booths on St. Martin, and if the minister or the government had any discussions with us or considered a state lottery. From a finance perspective, receiving dividend income by the government would be a good idea, like in the Netherlands, the Staatsloterij. It brings in net dividend income of about 130 million euros in 2021. However, during our early stakeholder sessions, it was not discussed. The question would be if the government would like to associate with the gambling industry or just regulate as a participating in lottery games has also a social impact. In addition to that, we did start the process of having meetings. We had discussions with the Ministry of TIAT regarding restructuring, looking at a possibility of a sort of a regulation, a lottery committee. So we'll try to get an update on that. Oh, and yes, we just have another update. And regarding also the lottery, it has been a concern of mine since I came in also Minister of Finance, not just seeing them all over, but also the question on the legal basis. The Ministry of TIAT has begun drafting or is in the final stages of a legislation, I believe, to basically have every lottery booth pay $12.50 a year for their location, which should generate about $500,000 in revenue a year. Next answer was regarding casinos. At this stage, there's a set information, but it is outdated and not complete. However, as we speak, we are extracting relevant information out of the tax system, which will be used in a later stage and be part of the explanatory memorandum. Regarding the next question, it was regarding the sequence to prefer have meetings with Parliament and the legislative process. Out of a legislative trajectory perspective, it would be standard that Parliament would handle the draft legislation once submitted by government. With regard to the alignment with the Economic Development Plan, this alignment is made through stakeholder sessions and relevant advice prepared for the Council of Ministers. The next question was regarding the fiscal working group. The ministerial decision number 1411-2022 on the 14th of December 2022, institutional decision technical work group for medium-term fiscal and policy review was published in the National Gazette of the 23rd of December 2022. This technical working group consists of technical representatives of the Netherlands, Finance Ministry, the Ministry of Triad, and the Central Bank Curaçao and St. Martin. The tasks of the technical working group are calculate a medium-term budget based on no policy change assumption for the country of St. Martin, draft a simplified overview of revenues and expenditures of policy intentions that are included in the budget and the government agreement, calculate the macroeconomic effects of policy actions that are included in the budget and government agreement. This is a decision of Minister of Finance and TIAD made and published before the swearing in of the current Minister of TIAD. The next question was, in a response to my previous question, that the minister indicated that one of his intentions was to abolish pending draft legislations in its different stages. The list referred to and from which, the list referred to and from which some draft legislations have been read out loud is a legislative agenda which was submitted by myself on February 17, by the then Minister of Finance on February 17, 2017. This agenda was submitted based on the request of the President of Parliament of January 18, 2017. So please note that in 2017, pre-IRMA, an agenda was drafted based on the request of the right of Honourable MP about desired and wanted amendments in tax law, taking into account the wishes the government had at the time. After IRMA, COVID-19, and the worldwide prices hike due to inflation, the economic topics that require attention have simply been revised. Also, because the financial position of the government has not improved, a number of solid ideas on tax improvements at a time have certainly come back in our current discussions with stakeholders, but also other ideas have been discussed. A number of draft legislations that the MP had mentioned will not come back into table, although again, specific topics will come back in the current tax improvements package. Next question, what is the government's position on the landsverordening kwijtschelding? I refer you back to the previous question. In 2018, there was a draft national ordinance belasting maatregeling 2018 and ontwikkelingsbank. That is also answered by question 5. Question 8, developments in the ESP program credits. Has the minister received any reports, evaluations, or has government done any rethinking? Yes, the government has had evaluations, have gotten reports, and this is one of the reasons that we looked into the tax that for small businesses, for micro, small, medium businesses, that was born out of these discussions and so forth. The legislations that were mentioned to be abolished, again, refers to question 5. Is there a timeline and general financial implication of measures yield? The financial implications will be part of the explanatory memorandum as part of the draft legislation submitted to Parliament. Our aim is to submit the first stage draft legislations at the Legal Department Affairs and Legislation in the 3rd to 4th quarter of 2023. And now move on to the answers from MP Gums. MP Gums, first question, based on feedback from the stakeholder sessions, 2 points were already mentioned, handling Airbnb and harmonization, collaboration with the French side. Could you provide with with a general update on both these topics. With regard to Airbnb, we have started the process of contacting Airbnb, not only Airbnb, but also VRBO through Expedia. We have submitted our initial documentation to them. In the past, when Airbnb had their IPO, they then downsized and they only had one person in charge of the whole Caribbean, which took a long time to get in contact with. We also made some contact through the Dutch embassy, which resulted in us actually having our legislation documentation submitted to them. So they are also busy reviewing the documentation sent to them. In the meantime, though, we are planning an awareness campaign regarding the matter on Airbnb. We also have now looked at different software that actually lets government know how many Airbnbs are actually how many home sharing homes there are on the island. And it even allows us to zoom in even more and identify how much revenue a particular Airbnb has generated. So it gives a lot of data, and with this data, we are forming a plan on how we plan to tackle it outside of just directly going with Airbnb, because Airbnb is an entity, and then there's still Airbnb, VRBO, and a few others. So we're looking at a holistic way of tackling the home sharing market. In regards to the friend side, meetings with the friend side brings a long-term trajectory. We have made contact, and there was a meeting with some of the team, with some counterparts. I believe it was in Brussels, and there's other meetings planned for the rest of the year. Next question. The Ministry of Finance is in the process of creating a payment system wallet that will provide a cheaper alternative for SMEs. It's sort of a Venmo mixed with Cash App. Typically, though, I would say that this type of innovation typically comes from the private sector, but seeing that the demand for that wasn't there, we decided from a government standpoint to develop this system, which should be the first draft should be with us in the end of the second quarter. And now move on to the questions by MP Pantoflet. Well, actually, there's a couple of statements. Statement. Yes. Move on to follow-up questions by MP S.A Wescot-Williams, which was a timeline next steps. As previously mentioned, our aim is to submit the first stage of the legislation at the Department of Legal Affairs and Legislation in the third quarter of 2023, and we will keep the public and Parliament up to date on that topic. And regarding the Road to Economic Recovery Plan and the transaction tax, as the chair lady previously mentioned in her statements, her closing statements, for her, it was not just about economic recovery plan. It was also, but transaction tax. It was her plan was mainly about going from direct to indirect taxes, which our proposal for tax improvement focuses on also. The follow-up question for MP S.A Wescot-Williams. The linkage to economic development and fiscal plan. Our proposal includes tax facilities to stimulate our economy, lowering tax rates, introduction of small business scheme, share mergers, legal mergers, aiming to create an equal level playing field. And in addition to that, we had a feedback from the Ministry of TIAT, and they mentioned that if the MP is referring to the development of the competition law, this is also part of the sub-measure of the country package, Measure E6. As it pertains to the economic zoning, the ministry is working on updating its residential economic policy, in particular to streamline with RUMI zoning plans. And they mentioned that if the MP is referring to E-zones, it was already reported by the Ministry of Finance that e-zone legislation will be abolished as part of the fiscal reform. The next question was regarding micro small businesses. The micro businesses will benefit the small businesses scheme and lower taxes. I now move on to the questions by MP Rameau. MP Rameau said she was keen to hear from the ministry on their vision on improving the process of filing taxes. The vision is to digitize the entire filing process, which starts with the filing of tax forms, taxpayers, and thereafter throughout an automated process from 40 to 50% of tax returns are assessed. This will result in a quicker response time on filed tax returns, and once assessed, taxpayers can view in their tax account in the portal their assessments and balances. Also including this vision is taxpayers can make payments and request their refunds, payment, arrangement, postponements, etc. through the portal. How can we educate the public on taxes and better assist residents when they are filing their taxes? The tax administration will again in 2023, as was the case in 2022, in collaboration with Community Help Desk, assist seniors in filing their income tax returns in various community centers, namely Coal Bay, Dutch Quarter, and St. Peter's. And in 2023, and before the end of 2023, also in Hope Estate. This will be done with existing staff, but for information sessions regularly, and additional staff will be required. In addition to that, the Ministry of Finance is also planning to host St. Martin's Financial Literacy Week. We aim to have it done in the second week of March, where we also plan to have sessions, workshops, and so forth during this week in regards to taxes. Next question, the views on tax exemptions for seniors. As you're aware, at the age of 65, our senior citizens are entitled to a higher tax-free allowance than citizens that have not yet reached that age. In addition, senior citizens are also not subject to the AOV levy. The government continues to assess opportunities to provide senior citizens more tax benefits within the budget restrictions. One of the proposed exemptions, to use your words, is to increase the tax-free rate income tax. This will be beneficial for the low-income earners and the elderly. The tax scheme for the micro small businesses, MP asks for a better explanation how it can benefit. For TOT purposes, we have been considering a scheme like in the EU, but also in Aruba and Curacao and the West Islands, where you leave SMEs out of the scope for TOT compliance obligations. Generally speaking, research has shown that if you will leave the certain SMEs out of the scope, for example, those SMEs with monthly revenues up to $20,000, you will lose around 3 to 4% of TOT revenues, but it will save the tax office around 75% of work processing, imposing of tax notices. We believe that, especially for SMEs, it saves a tremendous amount of compliance work, while it relieves the tax office from a lot of work in general. And now move on to the questions from MP Helga Martin. MP asks about a written response to her letters, and as discussed in the meeting, the letter will be sent in writing. The letter will be responded to in writing. Can Parliament be provided with a position paper that has been prepared? Yes, the presentation and the position paper will be shared after this meeting. The position paper will be updated and presented for approval to the Council of Ministers to be translated in a draft legislation. Once the legislation is drafted, it will be submitted to Parliament for Parliament's approval. To what extent has the economic recovery plan been taken into account? Again, I refer to that question by MP Sarah Wescot-Williams. How will the relationship with the northern side of the tax island be taken into account? The government believes that our discussions with the authorities on the French side could be increased and improved. We have a few of them scheduled. We're also getting the assistance of the Netherlands to have discussions in Paris with the tax team also. Now move on to MP Bryson. The first was a statement, and the second was a comment regarding co-legislation. The providing of the incentives to highly educated persons is a delicate balancing act between the economic benefits of bringing back St. Martin persons versus principles of equality between the residents of St. Martin that cannot benefit from the incentives. The government sees the benefits of bringing in highly qualified persons, but it has a variety of socioeconomic downsides. In addition, the government fears that those persons that do not qualify for reduced tax rates will litigate rejections to a large extent. Next question was in regards to taxing untaxed foreign nationals. And I want to thank the MP for his ideas. I am advised to base a certain value on per square meter fee, which will be more practical for execution purposes. The next question was in regards to a tourist levy. The Ministry of Finance is a coordinator of the public expenditure and tax collector. The allocation of revenue complicates this task. After all, if revenues are allocated to TIAT for marketing, the Ministry of Finance cannot any longer propose to use windfalls within this tax type to reduce the statutory rates within the income tax and or the discounts allowance. We understand the wish of the Ministry of TIAT to secure part of the tax money for the hotel and timeshare tax for their organization purposes. However, given the fact that there's a real chance that the tax revenues from the hotel and timeshare tax will increase considerably in the coming years due to increased tourism, high tax rates, and a broader base, we do not consider it appropriate to allocate the entire tax revenue from the hotel and timeshare tax to the Ministry of Tourism Affairs, Transport, and Telecommunications at all times. It should also be noted that in Section C1 of the country package, St. Martin states measures aimed at substantially reducing tax expenditures and contributions transfers to third parties. Again, the question economic recovery plan was already previously answered. And now go over to the questions from MP Biljani. The MP wanted to get some details on tax assessments. How far can we go? 5, 10, 15 years. Additional levying of taxes can, as a main rule, go back for 5 years under normal circumstances. However, there are instances when a taxpayer has acted in bad faith. Under those circumstances, the tax office can then levy additional assessments going back up to 10 years after finalizing respective year assessment. Foreign source income can be assessed after 15 years after the end of the respective year assessment. In regards to collection, the tax collector can collect any outstanding that is not statute barred without regard of the age of the date of the assessment. Next question was in regards to the receivable year breakdown on tax receivables, 2017 and back. In the financial administration of government, there are no receivables for taxes. Taxes paid are recorded on a cash basis. This is due to the way taxes are levied by law. Tentative assessments can be levied due to several reasons, such as non-filing, incorrect filing, insufficient information, misinterpretation, errors, etc., and can be later reduced or canceled upon further review by the tax inspector or by a court verdict. Next question was in regards to breakdown revenues. The application currently in use at the tax administration are a bit dated and regretfully do not provide the reporting tools with which such data can be extracted MP. So you wanted to know how many companies under 500,000 in certain areas and districts. In regards to your last question, MP, the applications currently in use at the tax administration again are dated. So regretfully, we cannot provide that sort of reporting tool as you want, but within short, we hope to be able to start a process for new IT systems where we will in the future be able to have these reporting tools and be able to give you the necessary information. Now I'll move on to the chair. MP stated that since 2012, we started off with a 34.5% profit tax, versus 25% until last year, and now down to 22%. Answer: the government is aware that St. Martin currently has one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world, especially in the local region. Corporate taxes are significantly lower or absent. Countries in that area that have lowered their tax rates, statutory tax rates, were often able to limit tax reductions so that the tax base was broadened, which basically funds a decrease of the statutory tax rate. The government is currently looking at to exactly do this as well so that St. Martin becomes more attractive to foreign investors. Although the government also stresses that the average effective corporate tax rate for St. Martin companies is a general rule lower. The next comment was in regards to profits, our realities, the community, and so forth. The answer here is since 2010, we had several governments whenever one of those governments was about to outsource the drafting of legislation or to outsource the finalization of legislation drafted by our department, those governments fell. For this reason, no legislative drafts on the proposed tax revisions have yet been presented to Parliament. Next question was in regards to tax exemptions. The underlying rationale of exemption for first-time buyers has been explained on the set of answers. The reference of abolishing land tax, inheritance tax comes from the realization that these taxes have not been imposed for decades, and Parliament motions of 2012, the abolition, the cleaning up of the laws that are not enforced, has no budget effects for that reason. Next question was in regards to the economic recovery plan. And again, as I mentioned, where you mentioned the easiest way to exist is if we go into indirect taxes. Yes, I agree with the MP in going from direct taxes to more indirect taxes. In the current revision proposals, a start has been made with proposals to introduce some indirect taxes, such as a tourist tax, and provide the competitive position of St. Martin entrepreneurs. Is not prejudice, special import duties, such as diesel, tobacco, alcohol, and soft drinks. But again, same tax can only be included if we have collaboration with the French side. MP, I see that's the last question by you, MP. Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister, for the answers. Thanks. Sorry, I'm just trying to adjust his mic. I see that we have our first speaker, MP Wescot-Williams. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to my colleagues and to the Minister and his support staff. Good afternoon to everyone tuned into this meeting. Madam Chair Lady, let me, without an introduction, go into questions which are actually questions for the Minister to clarify, if at all possible, because what I miss in the Minister's responses is concrete answers. And so let me go over them and see if I can get some more insight. The fiscal working group to which I referred, the reason for me referring to that fiscal working group is because I took note of the ministerial decision regarding this group. And I wanted to know if the group, which, as the minister indicated, and which is evident from the ministerial decision regarding the fiscal working group, does it have anything to do with the process for tax reform? Let me ask that. So does that group have anything to do with the process and steps of tax reform? The minister went into the question regarding the legislative trajectory of the ministry where taxation is concerned. And as I mentioned in my question, the overview that was provided back in 2017 and how the minister and the ministry looks at that overview right now. The answer by the minister, get a little closer. The answer by the minister was that not all of them, because of the changing scenarios, some of these will have been discarded, are no longer in the loop, so to speak. But could the minister be more direct in terms of which of them? And when I ask that question, I refer to the presentation provided by the minister during the previous discussion that we had on tax reform. The minister made a presentation, and in there, some issues were extracted as tax proposals that will be coming. Let me put it that way. So the minister keeps referring to the fact that the principle, one of the principles, is a move from direct to indirect taxation. So if the minister could be a little clearer and tie it into the slide that was provided to us in the presentation about some of the steps to be undertaken. Because the draft legislation, and especially the draft legislation that had already been drafted, the proposals for the taxes in that respect, the proposals are in the draft legislation. So when I ask about the draft legislation, it's whether those particular items are still part of the ongoing tax reform discussions, tax reform proposals. Madam Chairlady, as I continue, let me back up. We have now learned, I have now learned that the proposal for legislative tax reform will come in the third quarter of 2023. Are these individual pieces of legislation, or are we going to get one big legislative proposal for tax reform? So a couple of questions tie in to the remarks by the minister that the tax reform legislative process will, I guess, be presented to Parliament in the third quarter of 2023. So is that one big piece of legislation, or we're talking about a package of legislation with the different pieces of, or the different items of tax reform? Can the minister give any further elucidation to the process, one, the timeline, two, with respect to the tax proposal as far as the MSME sector is concerned? So can he tell us, in response to my questions and questions to some of my colleagues, the minister said, yeah, there are some intentions for this for the micro, small, and medium enterprise sector, and that these are, could the minister say anything more about this particular tax? This third quarter 2023 trajectory, Is the minister also saying that the Parliament of St. Martin will receive nothing more direct, nothing more concrete with respect to what is happening until we get the legislation? The answer regarding the transaction tax and my question about that, I smiled at the answer, because the minister has not really responded to that particular tax being or not being considered. The minister responded by saying the principle underlying the tax, which is a move from direct to indirect tax, that yes, that is a principle of the government in this whole tax reform. Madam Chair, lady, some months ago, the Chamber of Commerce of St. Martin had commenced with the sort of cleaning up their own database, and that would have led, hopefully, to a better understanding about active operating companies on St. Martin, which of course is important when we look at the tax base. Does the minister and the ministry have any further update where this is concerned? So are we any closer to the cleaning up of our business base and our tax base in general? Madam Chair, lady, I need to know from the minister if the minister is saying, as he alluded in some of his responses to my questions and questions of other members of parliament, that a discussion on the tax items themselves, a discussion on the tax principles themselves, that such a discussion would not be had with Parliament until we get the legislation. So while all of this is going on, and seemingly, and I would like to know with whom and how these have gone, seemingly there have been discussions with stakeholders, yet stakeholders themselves are asking what government's plans are. So is that the way that the minister views the continuation of this process? So we should now await and listen to some things being thrown out, and then we await the third quarter of 2023. Does the minister not see a material discussion in Parliament regarding tax reform as a way to go as well? So, and finally on that point, if the minister can provide a timeline of actions, activities leading up to this third quarter 2023 presentation, which apparently will be the legislative trajectory will get started, or no, without assuming, just let the minister explain better what is meant with that particular date or period mentioned. I thank you, Madam Chair, lady.
Thank you, MP Wescot-Williams, for the clarification as well as questions for the minister. I was going to take the opportunity now, but I'll do it at the end because I have MP Heiliger-Martin next, just to give a little bit more clarification, because I know that you are being questioned, Minister, about something that was part of the path to economic recovery that I presented, but I will clarify that towards the end, just so I can wait for all the questions to come in as well. MP Heiliger-Martin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, lady. Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to the minister and his support staff. Good afternoon to my fellow colleagues, and good afternoon to all those tuned in. Madam Chair, lady, I'm a bit disappointed in the way the answers were presented to us today. Actually, more so felt disrespected by the way the questions were semi-posed and answered, because it was not clear. I would appreciate it if possible, for future reference through you, Madam Chair Lady, if Minister of Finance could at least consider, reading out some of the questions so that we can follow through on what he's answering, and not only us, but mainly for the people listening, tuning in, because they don't understand the questions. They can't remember the questions that was posed a few weeks ago. So if it's for the people, because that's who we represent, for the clarity and the sake of the people tuning in, it would be nice that the minister would at least consider, like other ministers, to at least read out some of the questions so that everyone tuning in could follow. Now, for clarity's sake, Madam Chair Lady, I have asked over and over, regarding letters that I sent in since April of last year, August of last year, and November of last year. And the answer that I received today was, it will be sent in writing. Of course, Madam Chair Lady, I'm aware that I will be receiving it in writing, but the question is when. Is there a reason why is it some research that still has to be done? Can I get maybe at least a timeline as to, well, I'm still gathering information. I would need another month, another 2 months. But answering my question as to when I'll receive my answers by saying you'll get it in writing, that's not the answer that I'm looking for, Madam Chair Lady. So I'll ask again for the record, when exactly will I be receiving a response to my letters of April, August, and November? Also, there was a question I asked. I'm going to ask it for the record. Has our geographic situation and location within the region been taken into account with regards to our competitive position? I'll re-ask this question a different way. Will the government guarantee that the changes in our tax system won't negatively affect our position within the region? I hope, Madam Chair Lady, I can receive a clear answer on that. And lastly, I have one question, a direct question to the minister. What is the minister, through you, Madam Chair Lady, what is the minister's position on transaction tax in general? With that, I'd like to leave it there, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you, MP Halligan Martin. MP Pontiflet, you are next up. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to the Chair, my colleagues, Parliament, the Honourable Minister of Finance and the support staff, persons that are viewing and those that are listening. Madam Chair, many questions were posed, answers given. I want to take it from another angle, Madam Chair, because some of the questions, I believe, are technical questions that probably indeed those that are listening probably could not follow everything, but the important thing is, Madam Chair, is that we ensure that the public feel that they're part of the discussions. And I know for years now we're trying to improve the tax inspectorate, the receiver's office. For many years now we're trying to do that. As a matter of fact, if I can recall, several times the former Minister of Finance, Mr. Richard Gibson, had, I believe, wanted to budget something like 50 million guineas, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I can be corrected, in order to, let me use this term, revamp the Inspector of Taxes in order to bring them up to date with, let's say, present-day tax offices or tax departments. But, Madam Chair, I have several questions that I want to pose at this time through to the Minister. And the agenda point is tax reforms, and I believe tax reform measures and government vision on tax reform. I Googled the word tax reform, and it says, is the process of changing the way taxes are collected or managed by government, and is usually taken to improve tax administration, to provide economic or social benefits, to reduce tax evasion and avoidance, and to allow for more efficient and fair tax collection. Now, Madam Chair, what we have to keep in mind always is that we have a staff. The Inspector of Taxes, Receiver's Office, consists of individuals. And it is always important for any employer to know the status of the employees, their position, how they feel, are they happy, and so on. Why I ask that, Madam Chair Lady, because it is a fact. And this is why I decided to pose questions that mostly in the direction of the staff of these two departments to see exactly and how far they are able to meet the present realities that we are facing in a very fast changing technological world. My first question, Madam Chair, through to the Minister is, how many persons are employed at the Tax Inspectorate and also at the Receiver's Office? How many persons are employed at the Tax Inspectorate and the Receiver's Office? How many of them are full-time employees, and how many of them are on contracts? How many of them are full-time employees, and how many of them are on contract? The answer with regards to the outstanding years was answered. I believe the question was answered that was posed to my colleague, Mr. Biljani, so I'll skip that one. Does the audit department have enough persons in order to deal with the audits? Does the audit department have enough persons in order to carry out audits? Another question is, what is the highest paid salary at both institutions, at both departments, at the Inspectorate of Taxes and at the Receiver's Office? What are the highest paid salaries? Because, you know, because of how things are, something you reach in a particular scale and you're stuck. So even the cost of living goes up, your salary is stuck in that one place. So that's why I need to know exactly what is the highest salary paid at both the Inspectorate and the Receiver's Office, and what is the lowest salary paid at both organizations. What is the lowest salary paid there? Another question, Madam Chair, to the Minister through you is, does any training take place for both departments? Does any training take place for both departments? And when was the last time training was done for these persons? Surprisingly enough, this question, I had it prepared from about 2 days ago, and I was surprised, not really surprised, when I heard this morning that we had a glitch, I believe, and the system is old and outdated. And that is why I referred in the beginning to Minister Gibson when he said he needed some funds, something like 50 million, in order to revamp that department, because for the last, I can maybe exaggerate, say almost 20 years now, nothing has been done in order to improve it to the extent to which it should become compliant with today's modern world. How many persons today, Madam Chair, are going on pension? And are the persons that are prepared, or does the government have people in place in order to replace them? So how many persons are going in pension, and are we able to replace them at short notice? I had a question of the issue of outstanding taxes, but I believe that was answered where I believe the minister said that there are no receivables because of how the tax system is set up. If I understood him correctly, then it means we have no idea what taxes are out there. Also, Madam Chair, through you, I was trying to find the article, but I didn't get a chance to finish look for it, where it talks about the issue of tax collection, because I have been told personally on more than one occasion that once the Receiver's Office or the Inspector of Taxes decides you have to pay a particular amount, you have no recourse but to pay it. But I think somewhere it is mentioned where that one cannot collect to the point where the individual cannot pay their normal bills. In other words, for instance, if you make, let's say 2,000 guilders a month, and your bills are about, let's say about 50%, and then you find where the tax office is telling you you have to pay 1,000 guilders, so which means you're left with practically nothing. So there has been an article, and I would like the minister, I'm trying to find it myself here, but I don't have the time to look for it really, landverordening of inwording van belastingen, bijdragen en vergoedingen, because it says that the receivers cannot just tell you, look, you have to pay this no matter what. It has to take into consideration the financial position of the taxpayer. But again, I'm hearing that it's not done that way. You either pay or they start to seize. I also believe, I think a question was answered already in regards to the write-off of taxes. I don't think there's a legal basis for that as yet, but I definitely think it should be looked at because there are times when persons, as I said, live abroad, and I understood that even though you live abroad for maybe whatever 10 or so years, when you come back, they can still tax you. That's a very interesting concept. I think these laws have to be amended because they're quite old, and it says land for ordinances, national ordinances. It means we got to do it ourselves, I believe. Yes, my question was also going to be what was the last time the collection ordinance was amended, but I know the answer to that already. I think that's all for now, Madam Chair, and I read answers from the Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Pontiflet, and all the MPs before for your questions. Minister, I'll take this chance now. Anybody else? Sorry, I just wanted to make sure that no other members of Parliament wanted to talk. But I'm just going to take the opportunity now, Minister, before I pass the floor to you, just to clarify a couple of things and then also pick up on some of the answers you gave us. So just again, when the transaction tax was brought up, it wasn't brought up as a fix everything when it comes to tax. It was literally because you are aware that our island, or any country for that matter, you need a certain amount of money to survive and operate on. So there's no way that we can eliminate everything and just replace it with one item. So it was always going to be, and if anyone remembered, it started out with, I think, a percentage somewhere around 0.25%. And while you figure out how you could supplement a different tax with the income that would come in from a new indirect tax, regardless of what that indirect tax is or is called. That was the idea behind it, to present something where, in order for us to remove the existing taxes we have in place now, it has to be replaced by something that will maintain the levels of the cash that we have on hand or the revenue that we generate as a country, which is why we also went, you had every ministry coming up with different revenue streams, or ministries coming up with actually controlling their revenue streams. And this is where you come into adjustments, percentages adjustments. And one of the things that I picked up on today, so I hope that cleared it up a little bit when it comes to the transaction tax. It really wasn't a fix everything. It was more of, this is an alternative for you that requires minimal effort to collect. The same way how you would have a license fee that's collected for the central bank, it requires minimal effort to collect, the same way how you would have the Airbnb collecting your fees and then sending in lump sum to the government on a monthly basis. So anything that would make it more efficient to collect taxes is what I would support, what I was trying to bring forth for this discussion to continue, which is exactly why you have heard CFT, you have heard even with the IMF reports, you have heard the ministry and members of parliament continuously talk about indirect taxes as part of the discussion, because it requires minimal effort to collect. And when you know that our struggle here is compliance, it's not because you have some that intentionally avoid taxes. No, it's not only that. Do we have an environment where we can improve the way that people, actually pay their taxes or disclose this information? Sure, but we are constantly working on those improvements. But I wanted to make it clear about that side of it, and I'm sure that as we go along, we'll have more opportunities for this, because like I said last time in the beginning of this meeting when we started, everyone is waiting for tax reform. Everyone wants to hear about tax reform. We constantly hearing complaints that we're not seeing that return on what we're giving in. So it just needs to be there at the forefront. And I will give you a heads up, Minister. I know that we have budget debate coming up, and this will not be the end of a tax reform discussion, but surely you could tell from the first time when we started this meeting 2 weeks ago to the continuation of it today that we're just looking for ways and means to collect something that will make it easier on the people and not continuously increase taxes on them, coming up with new taxes on them, because that's the last thing that our people need. We do not need to be taxing them more. And that's why I said I'm going to go back to a comment that you said today in one of your answers that I picked up on. And you said, and please correct me if I'm wrong, cleaning up of laws that aren't enforced, and it was back in 2012. And I believe maybe you referred to the land tax when you're talking about that. I think that's that's one of them, one that isn't enforced. I don't have your presentation in front of me, but while you were saying that, I said, yes, this is a perfect example of a tax that scared the living daylights out of me, because we have a land tax. Whether or not you agree with it, it's not the point. You have a land tax here that exists that we never, ever enforced, which means we do not collect on land tax. But in the scenario that we're in now, where we need liquidity support, where we need cash for this country, then my fear is that all of a sudden you would go from one day to the next and enforce land tax because it's there. That has been my fear. And I'm glad you say it, because you bring up something again today that in the desperation to make more money for this country without having to ask for liquidity support, that we don't go to those unenforced laws and demand it of our struggling community. So I'm glad you said it. If I missed out any more of those laws that are in place that we don't enforce, but they're there waiting for us to say, hey, this is there in case we get desperate, that's what I do not want and will not support unless we do it in a way, which is the point behind my conversation of the transaction taxes. You were bringing in something to make it easier to collect from the government side, as well as minimal invasion on the side of the person paying, whether that is through your payroll or whether that is through any other tax that we have there that is additional in your assessment. That's the point of me bringing and combining those two things, because we cannot, because we need revenue for this country, start just adding on more and more and more taxes. So if there's any other unenforced, please let me know, Minister. Before I give you back the floor, I would like to take a 5-minute break, please. Thank you. Meeting adjourned for 5 minutes. Welcome back to this Committee of Finance meeting. Before I give the floor to the Minister, MP George Pontiflet actually signed in to speak. MP Pontiflet, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just missed two questions there. One of them being, through Madam Chair, is not a question really. How do I phrase this? There are complaints again, and let me be frank, these are not new complaints. They've been coming back and forth for years, but of course, we got to find a way to solve them now once and for all. I see it's cold, Madam Chair. I can feel it too, trust me. The issue of when government owes you and when you owe government. For example, the government owes you 1,000 guilders, and you owe them 200 guilders. Why is it that, in this case, let me say the receiver's office holds on to your 1,000 guilders instead of just taking the 200 guilders and giving you your 800 guilders? I mean, it's nothing new. It has been going on for years now. Why do they do it? And I need an answer on that because it really does not make sense. It does not make sense, absolutely. My other question was, oh yes, because I believe the minister said there are no receivables, I think, if I'm correct. I got to make sure, through Madam Chair, the minister said there are no receivables when it comes to tax collection and so on. I just want to make sure on the tax base. Okay, because my next question would have been, then if there are no receivables, then what about the payables? Because both have to balance out each other. You must have receivables and payables. So I'm sure that I can get explanation from the minister as to how that works. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Pontiflet. MP Wescot-Williams, give you the floor.
Thank you again, Madam Chair Lady. And Madam Chair Lady, just let me add to my last comments with respect to the trajectory and when Parliament will become involved. It is quite frustrating periodically to read or hear from other institutions, amongst which the CFT, regarding their recommendations for taxes. They have referred to the casinos. They have, in fact, they have referred to this land tax issue on more than one occasion. But we can't sufficiently chime in because we don't know if and how these type of issues are taken along. So again, I have the strong feeling that when it comes to this particular process, Parliament is somewhat being excluded from being part of the process and the discussions regarding tax reform, tax improvement, or whatever label is going to be given to it. So I wanted to add in that part about other institutions. The central bank has its ideas, and I mean, I could go on and on. So I just wanted to highlight that point. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you, MP Wescot-Williams. During our break, I actually already discussed with the minister that he would answer as many as he can today. No, right now. So there's no need for us to take a break, and I will give the floor over to the minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In regards to the last statement by MP Sarah Wescot-Williams, CFT has a position, as you mentioned, on certain taxes. MP De Beaver mentioned, for example, the land tax. CFT has been having a position on that, on land tax, and we, in our presentation, mentioned being taken off. So yes, a lot of entities can have their position, SHTA, CFT, Central Bank, and Parliament can also have their position, which is one of the reasons why we had this meeting and the previous meeting also. So if there are any positions of Parliament, I look forward to those to be included in the document before we send the new proposal to the Council of Ministers. And regarding the questions from MP Sarah Wescot-Williams, the Fiscal Working Group, The MP asked, MP mentioned she took note of this working group, and she wanted to know what they had to do with the process of tax reform. This group is meant to, this is not a tax group. This group is meant to improve the calculations on a medium-term budget, the one that you're referring to. The next answer for the MP. With regard to tax legislations, all will be taken up in the tax improvements. For example, Antwerp's wijzigingslandsverordening, herziening formeel belastingsrecht will be proceeded. The next question or answer. Until now, the intention is to submit a package of legislation consisting of different amendments to Parliament. Next. Regarding the MSME and the elucidation, it's a proposal will be included in the package of legislation that will be submitted to the Department of Legal Affairs for vetting in the third quarter of 2023. The transaction tax and what are the plans? I think MP De Beaver gave a great elucidation on her reasoning, and from the ministry perspective, it's more about the concept of indirect taxes. So at that point in time, especially seeing that we were dealing with a pandemic, COVID, and so forth, we were all, as ministers, then looking for different ways to generate revenue, different ways to sustain the island. And one of the concepts were indirect tax, such as transaction tax. And as she stated, we are looking at different ways of going from indirect taxes to, from direct tax to indirect taxes, and we will continue to also look at the possibilities of transaction tax and the effects of this in the future. So it's not totally taken out. It's something that we will look at. But we are focusing on going from direct taxes to indirect taxes. MP mentioned about the chamber cleaning up of databases. Yes, the chamber started a process. I believe the number was about 28,000 businesses that were registered at the chamber, where they believe that it was significantly less, I believe close to 9,000. They started this process. It's a tedious process. I believe they clean up about 500 a month. So we already know how long that's going to take, I believe. That process has started. We also started our process of cleaning up our information. And we actually were discussing yesterday to have a meeting between S.A, the Chamber, Finance, and TIAT to come up with a better scheme of, one, sharing of data, of information. I told my staff yesterday that we have to, if I saw a situation with MP Bryson, for example, where he deregistered at the chamber, but it was not deregistered somewhere else, but for example, by tax office or by the Ministry of TIAT or S.A, or someone cancels by another entity but doesn't cancel somewhere else. So we have some outdated laws that doesn't allow certain types of data sharing, but I do believe we can have some sort of policy, a working policy between the entities that triggers that information be shared. I think this is one of the reasons why we have this mess now, because over the last years, decades, the lack of sharing of data has caused an enormous backlog in terms of deregistering and so forth. The next question was in regards to the tax principles themselves. The comments and questions, suggestions of the Finance Committee of Parliament will be included in the position paper, after which legislation will be drafted and after additional consultations. MP Helga Martin. Will the government guarantee that tax reform will not affect our business community negative? That's the aim. The aim is to have a more progressive tax system. Again, transaction tax comment was already mentioned, it was already answered. regards to the letter, as I mentioned before, we did answer a majority of your questions in verbal meetings, meetings already verbally, but it's at the top of our to-do list now to answer your letter as soon as possible. So in a few weeks, you'll have a letter sent to you via Parliament. In regards to MP Pontiflet, how many persons are employed at the tax office and receivers full-time? Receivers has 46 employees, of 2 are going in retirement to 2023. Inspectorate has 30. The section support has 10. The audit has 8, in which 2 are going to retirement in 2023. Does the audit department have enough to deal with audits? No, it doesn't, but we are going to have support from the S.A to help with audits when necessary. MP, you asked a couple of other questions. You had exactly 4 more questions regarding the highest salary and so forth. And the next was about the lowest paid salary. The third was in regards to the training that takes place. That one can be answered now. We have trainings currently going on. Another item that we discussed with Ms. Hazel, who's also very much into the growth of her staff. We also discussed trainings that will help staff be able to grow into other positions potentially. And then we have one more question for you. So MP, we have 3 questions for you that weren't answered. Can we send those in writing if possible? And then there were statements from MP De Weaver and regarding transaction tax, which I think we thoroughly discussed. And then the last one was in regards to government, for example. Is it MP George also? Okay. So MP, we will answer your last 5 questions in writing if possible. Okay.
Thank you, Minister. MP Wescot-Williams, I saw that you pressed the button to speak, so I'm going to give the floor to MP Wescot-Williams. Thank you for the answers, Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Minister, I want to just kind of focus or zoom in on some of your last comments, and that was with respect to Parliament's involvement, and you alluded to Parliament's comments being taken along in the document that is going to come or something to that effect. On the basis of what do you see Parliament commenting? And with this I mean, do we go by your proposal with some of the items as mentioned in your presentation, or do we just, with not knowing what your proposal is, just start a discussion here in Parliament on the different aspects of tax reform? So I want to get to Parliament's involvement and input into this process. And I hear you saying that Parliament's comments will be taken along. So my question is, on the basis of what do we do that? Do we just call a meeting tomorrow and we talk tax reform in the air, or, you know, so what on the basis of what would you like us to have these discussions to provide you with input into what you're doing is my question. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Wescot-Williams. I do agree with what MP Wescot-Williams said, because last time when you came for the first part of this meeting, you had the presentation to us where you listed up the measures, the various measures, and then the stages that you would go through with it. So in that, and that's one of the reasons that I asked as well about the land tax. So if, for instance, in the tax reform, what will be up for discussion then, or debate, is if it's all the various measures you listed in your presentation of small business scheme, land tax withdrawal, then if that's the essence of it, then hopefully that answers your question. If that's going to be the basis of our discussion and debate, support or not support when it comes to tax reform. MP Wescot-Williams, I hope I got a little bit of the gist too of what you were saying, because I do see what you're asking for. What exactly is it that we are going to be looking at in terms of legislation? So I'll give you back the floor. Hopefully I got it.
Yes, Madam Chair Lady. we are getting to the point also with your comments indeed. And because even in a case like that, if the proposal is, which is also included, to lower profit tax, should we have a discussion on that in terms of what we think is feasible in terms of amount? Does the minister understand where I'm trying to get at? So just having pointers, to me, would be kind of wasting our time if we don't have some indication. The minister, in his presentations, I'm sure, have started to gather financial data with respect to these different proposed measures, data that we don't have yet. So I don't think it would be right for us to start a discussion on lowering profit tax and say, no, it shouldn't be down to, what, 29? You understand what I'm saying, Madam Chair Lady and Minister? I need to know where is Parliament expected to go with this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Wescot-Williams. Sorry, Minister, I know you wanted to say something beforehand, but I give you back the floor now.
Yes, MP. In regards to Parliament's role, one, the reports that are going to come out of these meetings will be taken up into the position paper. But in addition to that, in previous meetings, for example, it was mentioned, for example, Parliament gave a strong position on, for example, sin tax, which is something I brought from the Parliament meeting to the group on this area we have to look at. And out of that, we looked at the harmonization with the French side, which also came out of Parliament also, and so forth. But typically, if you look at all the laws for the last, since we are here, the last 3 years, Parliament, when the laws come to Parliament is when we have the discussion on these items. In regards to if there is a particular laws and so forth that Parliament sees needs to be looked at and so forth. Like, for example, it was stressed today about the land tax and not being enforced and so forth. These items, again, are going to be taken up into the position paper. So again, the laws will be coming to Parliament as all the other laws do, and the discussions will be there for Parliament.
Thank you, Minister. I will give the floor back to MP Wescot-Williams.
Madam Chair, Lady, thank you. I'll leave that for what it is because it's still not really clear. I think the minister kind of switched on his last comment compared to what he had mentioned before. So I'll leave that for what it is and just ask if all of the proposed laws are going to come in the third quarter of 2023, or is there a process with different legislation coming at different times? I had asked it before, but you gave a double answer. You said we're going to get a general tax reform law, but then you also mentioned some other tax areas. Madam Chair Lady, if the minister could respond to that, please. Thank you.
As I mentioned in my answers, at the end of the third quarter, the package goes to the Legal Affairs Department to then be sent on to Parliament. So in the third quarter, the laws are going there, and we are doing a package of legislation.
Thank you, Minister. I look to the floor to see if there's any other questions from the members of Parliament. Thank you very much, Minister, for coming here today with your team to answering us. Like I said earlier, this is going to be the beginning of a lot of discussions when it comes to tax reform. This is just the start of it. So I very, very eagerly await when we can return and have a deeper discussion on exactly this topic. I want to thank you, Minister, and your support staff for your presence here today and for providing the answers at the same time. Also, I do take note that you did say that you would send some of the answers in writing to MP Pontiflet, just to get an idea of when that would be possible.
By next week, Tuesday?
Next week, Tuesday, is fine. Perfect. Thank you very much. Before I close out the meeting, I do see that MP Wescot-Williams asked for the floor again. MP Wescot-Williams, you have the floor.
Thank you again, Madam Chair Lady. If the minister could just indicate whether the budget, tying into a comment that you made, if he could just give us maybe some type of a schedule outlook for the budget, updated schedule outlook for the budget. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you, MP Wescot-Williams. Indeed, I did mention the budget earlier, Minister, and after the visit that we had from CFT, I think within the last week and a half, of course, that's going to be on top of everyone's mind and on top of the agenda. If you're able to answer that, I'll give you the floor straight away.
Yes, we aim to have the budget at Parliament the first week of March.
Thank you, Minister. Which will give us some time since some members will be away for IPCO, but thank you, Minister, again, and your team. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this meeting. I thank you all for your participation, and I hereby close this meeting. Thank you.